Today on BRStv, we're going LED. Hi guys, my name is Ryan. Welcome to another week of the BRS 160, where every week we do our best to help you guys, members of the reefing community, enjoy your tanks and find new ways to explore the hobby. We do that by following the setup and progression of this 160-gallon reef tank. This is the week you've been waiting for, LEDs. We're going to start with the general pros and cons, including why so many reefers have gravitated to LEDs over the years. Evaluate LEDs in general based on the same criteria we use on T5s and halides. Discuss what you should look for in an LED option, a breakdown of some of the most popular options, and finish with how to tune your LED's power, spectrum, and shimmer. There are a ton of advantages associated to LED lighting, starting with you'll never have to buy bulbs again, which saves a lot of money and reduces maintenance. Related to that, LEDs are also more energy efficient, which lowers operating costs, and nice for those of you that are attempting to reduce their carbon footprint. Most LEDs are also controllable, which has a whole array of benefits, including dimming each individual color spectrum to create any color you might like, so you don't have to buy every single bulb on the market and continually swap them trying to find that perfect color. Just turn a knob or use the sliders on your phone to fine-tune exactly what you're looking for, including some visual colors LEDs just do better than anything else. Controllability not only means dimming for dusk to dawn effects, but you can actually simulate the sun traveling across the sky from one end of the tank to the other, as well as weather patterns. The power output and spectrum with LEDs is also pretty stable over time, unlike T5 and halide bulbs, which do lose power intensity and color shift as bulbs age. Lastly, many LED modules are very low profile, attractive, and small form factor makes them easy to manage, and they offer the shimmer missing from lighting sources like T5. At this point, basically everyone is probably sold on LEDs. They have lower operating costs, offer flexibility, stability, and visually attractive in and outside of the tank, and they offer controllability options, which are really hard to achieve with other lighting sources. However, none of the light sources are perfect, and LEDs have some of their own challenges, starting with, despite all of the super attractive technology benefits with LEDs, most reefers simply have more success maintaining healthy, colorful, growing corals with older, more proven technologies like T5 and halides. How successful reefers are with LEDs seems to vary wildly, from really awesome results to struggling. There are a ton of theories the community has developed related to this, but it all generally revolves around proper spectrum, proper intensity, and shadowing effects associated with strong single points of directional light. None of these things will prevent success, but they're all challenges that need to be considered. End of the day, I think the biggest reason reefers experience different levels of success using the exact same light and for the most part the exact same corals is, unlike T5 and halides, which are largely plug and play and appropriate for basically any level of reefer, LEDs offer a ton of adjustment options to power, spectrum, and positioning that have rather large impacts on intensity, spread, and coverage. This means there'll be a bit of a learning curve as you explore the options with your particular light. I think this is a good time to remind everyone that the primary purpose of the lighting, spectrum, and power is to provide the proper source of nutrition to our corals. Given a chance to think about it, most reefers would agree visual and technology-based goals are a fairly distant second. Just because you have the ability to slide the spectrum and intensity from 0 to 100% doesn't mean that any old setting is going to provide the proper spectrum and intensity and resulting nutrition to our corals. Fact is, 90% of reefers out there don't know what power or intensity they're even shooting for, and even less proper spectrum, and haven't put a lot of thought into intensity spread or effects of shadowing. On top of that, maybe 1% of reefers own a tool to measure these things, even if the goals were clear. Almost all of us are just using our eyes to measure spectrum and intensity, and the fact is our eyes are wildly inaccurate measurement tools. For those of you that are achieving the most successful reef tanks, just keep doing what you're doing because you're either taking an advanced approach to the settings, your guesses are intuitive, or include some element of luck. For everyone else, hopefully by the end of this video, the goals and how to achieve them will be a bit clearer. End of the day, no lighting source on its own is perfect on all elements, so let's move on to the criteria we developed, starting with the ability to provide adequate life support to the ecosystem in our reef tanks with enough direct intensity or PAR, enough diffuse lighting, and the proper spectrum. Overall, we gave LED lighting a 7.6 in this regard. In relation to intensity, we gave LEDs a 10 out of 10 because most of them are capable of providing more than enough intensity for any tank. In fact, most of the most popular LED options are capable of producing far more power than you would ever really need, and in some cases as much as 3 times as much power as most reefers would ever require. Keep in mind that when you're using LEDs, you're 100 times more likely to kill your corals with too much intensity than not enough. Corals can survive low light for months to very prolonged periods in most cases, but can die in a couple days when exposed to too much light, so keep that in mind when you're setting your light. In terms of providing diffused light, we gave LEDs a 6. This has got a lot better over the last few years as the industry has largely abandoned lenses that focus the light into intense beams and narrow the spread. Net effect is at depths of 12 to 24 inches, you can see fairly even dispersion. However, at higher depths like the 3 to 9 inch range, you're going to see significant hot spots. The closer you get to the LED source, meaning it can be hundreds of par higher, just inches to the right or left, which will affect coral growth either to or away from the light or even burn the edges. Single points of light are also much more susceptible to shadowing effects from the aquascape or from the internal layers of the coral, which can impact coral tissue health and coloration in the shadowed areas. Now, all of this is manageable to some degree by elevating the light to get a wider spread, using a fixture which spreads the LEDs over a larger area, or using additional modules. Well, almost every manufacturer says their module is good for a 2 foot by 2 foot area. Most of the really awesome tanks you see that feature densely packed, evenly colored corals with natural growth patterns has the LED module spaced 12 to 18 inches apart, depending on the selected module. Rating LEDs on spectrum is really difficult because almost everything we know about providing the right spectrum mix to corals is based on a lot of anecdotal experience. There are some reefers with firm opinions based on sound logic, but everything in relation to corals, spectrum, and LEDs is still largely unproven theory, and the hobby really hasn't come close to agreeing on a whole lot. So end of the day, while I'd like to give LEDs a big question mark, I'll rate them a 7 based on the fact that depending on your settings and the quality of the LED fixture or module you buy, it's likely somewhere between a 5 and 9, but that's really going to be dependent on the spectrum settings you implement as part of your program. When evaluating visual appeal, we looked at overall color, contrast, and shimmer in the tank, lighting effects and controllability, and visual appeal of the fixture itself. Overall, we give LED lighting a 9.3 in this regard. We give LEDs an 8 based on the visual aspects related to color, contrast, and shimmer. The best LED options out there will give you an array of color options, which will basically allow you to fine-tune the color to your exact needs. Some of the less expensive options don't have quite the same flexibility, but come close. We did dock visual appeal a couple of points because the corals themselves tend to be slightly less colorful under LEDs than other lighting options, and the shimmer can look more like a color-separated flicker or disco ball than a shimmer if not implemented properly. On visual appeal of the modules and fixtures themselves, we gave LED lighting a 10 out of 10. Almost all of them are ultra low profile, really small and attractive. It's super easy to give LEDs a 10 out of 10 on controllability. Basically all of them allow you to adjust intensity and spectrum, some via your computer, some with wireless devices like your phone, including controllers, and some have simple knobs or other options available. If I could, I'd give LEDs a 12 out of 10 on controllability. Lastly, in terms of price, we rate LEDs an 8 out of 10. While at face value, some of the better LEDs are not cheap, especially if you install them in denser arrays than one every 24 inches. They're really not that expensive either if you consider the 5-year cost of ownership. You don't have to buy bulbs, and to some degree there's energy savings. That's with the assumption that you aren't a technology junkie that always has to have the latest and greatest TV, car, phone, or other gadget. If that's the case, you already know your technology addiction isn't cheap. End of the day, LED lighting came in at a solid 8.3, which overall came in just below the 8.6 we gave T5 lighting and slightly higher than the 7.6 we gave halide lighting. It might be hard to understand how an established technology like T5 could come out on top of something as new and cool as LEDs, and keep in mind that it only just barely nudged out a win, but T5s came out on top because we put such a huge focus on the ability to support life and simplicity. Our primary goal for us in the BRS community is to maintain a healthy, stable reef tank full of colorful, growing corals. Technology and features is really secondary. So a ton of reefers have had some pretty stunning tanks with LEDs, so let's discuss how we can emulate that success, starting with identifying what makes a good LED module or fixture and how to select the right one. Like any other product out there, all of the contenders say they're the best, and from their vantage point, they probably are. I just don't really think there is a best option because they all do something uniquely well. However, if you understand your desires and the available offerings, you can absolutely select the best option for your tank. To help make this more simple, I think we need to bring this down to its most basic elements, which is, can it produce enough par for what I'm going to keep in the tank? Is the par spread out enough for my needs, and does the controllability fit my desires for the tank? We took PAR measurements and shot spectrographs of some of the most popular LED lights out there that span a wide range of price points. Most of these light sources are the accumulation of pucks or light sources, so for our evaluation we decided to measure these single light sources or pucks against each other, which are all in a similar wattage range and price points, with the Radeon XR15 Pro, Kessel 360 wide and narrow, Hydra 26 HD, Z-Lite 6500, and the Max Spec 420. To decide how much PAR is enough, you need to decide either what you're going to put in this tank or decide that you're going to purchase something on the high end which allows for future flexibility. However, to make a determination on this, we first need to decide on how much PAR really is enough. If there's one thing I hope everyone comes away with today, beyond everything else, it's more PAR is not better, and riding the edge of the high end is way more likely to kill corals than riding the low end. Corals have shown an amazing ability to adapt to a lot of lower light environments and thrive. Too much light can kill them basically overnight or burn them until they give up and die. So let me say this again, unless you're a really advanced reefer with a ton of experience acclimating corals to higher PAR environments in the aquarium, don't shoot for the high end, aim for the middle of the road that reefers find acceptable. If you're happy with your results and the corals are thriving, resist the temptation to change things, because stability is the #1 key to a healthy, thriving reef tank. If you do want to raise the PAR on a tank that's already thriving, do it extremely slow, like 10 or 20 PAR a month, which is like a 5% increase. But seriously, if you're having the color, growth, and health you're looking for already, don't mess with success by trying to push the boundaries. There's a lot of debate on what the right PAR is for SPS, LPS, and softy tanks, and there isn't exacting guidelines, but we're going to give some pretty firm advice today, and due to the nature of the hobby, not everyone will agree, but for the most part, I think people will appreciate our approach. The suggested range for SPS is typically anywhere from 150 to around 500. Honestly, that range is huge, and I have no idea where that came from, because it'd be pretty darn hard to maintain a PAR of 500 throughout the entire tank. Even the gold standard of reefing with the halide T5 hybrid with a 14K double-ended bulb and 4 popular ATI T5 bulbs, we only saw a PAR of 500 at depth of 6 inches in the center 6-inch square area. After that, it quickly fell off. At a depth of 12 inches, we're seeing mostly between 150 and 300 PAR, and at 18 inches, right around 200. To me, this hybrid solution is on the higher end of typical PAR values. I also know you can have success with halide-only solutions and large reflectors. This is the most popular radium bulb at 18 inches with a large Cosmel reflector, and most of the measurements are right around 150. I would call this approaching the low end of PAR requirements for an SPS tank. So based on common solutions everyone knows to work to various degrees on SPS tanks, that does fit the extremely wide range of 150 to 500 that the community shares. But if you dig a bit deeper and scale down the impact of the extreme high and low points from the equation by averaging all 36 points at 6, 12, and 18 inches, the PAR is all about the same at about 200 with the Infinity Hybrid. Based on this, I'd likely shoot for something even throughout my entire tank with a range of about 150 to 300 PAR. To back that theory up with some real-life results, we took measurements from both Jason and Josh's tank, which most people would agree are successful tanks. You can see a vast majority of the measurements fall within that range. Josh's tank in particular has been running the same lighting intensity for a year now, so I can tell you with absolute certainty that the PAR levels he's maintaining is far from a limiting factor for success with his tank. End of the day, SPS corals are a big category and no range will capture them all, but my personal advice for PAR in an SPS only tank is try and find a solution that comes as close as possible to fitting within that 150 to 300 range at any depth or area of the tank. Just so we're totally clear, if you're hearing a range of 150 to 300 and thinking, okay, I'll go shoot for 300 everywhere in the tank, that means at the top of the tank you're likely going to be 600 to get 300 at the bottom, and that's a range of 600 to 300 and not the 300 to 150 we just mentioned. LPS tanks can be anywhere from between 25 PAR to over 100, so basically any light will work for them as long as you turn them down. However, if you know you're looking for an LPS only tank or a mixed reef with SPS near the top, it opens the doors a bit on lowering the budget as well as focusing on other important elements like light spread, form factor, shimmer, or other things important to you. One thing to consider with an LPS or mixed reef is you might actually be looking for something that doesn't provide a super even blanket of PAR, because many of the LPS corals need much lower light than others and often look a lot better in really low light environments, so you might want to select a less diffused light source capable of producing darker areas in the tank. This is how all the single puck lighting sources performed on par and spread, lowest cost option, working our way up. The MaxSpec Razer is significantly lower in cost than the rest of the competition and a fairly popular choice because of that, and uses a standard puck style implementation of LEDs. Longer the fixture gets, the more pucks you get. At 6 inches deep in the center, you see a par of 197 to 234. 6 inches to the right, it drops to 73, and after that, basically nothing at 20 par, which is typical for a single puck like this. At 12 inches deep, we saw 120, 78, and 34, and at 18 inches deep, we saw 82, 65, and 44. Based on this range, I think the Razer is a solid, affordable option for a mixed reef tank, which can sustain corals with higher par requirements as long as they're placed well. But the par does drop off fairly quick the further you get from the puck itself. Next up is the Hydra 26 HD, which uses 2 smaller pucks packed in a really small, attractive form factor. With the Hydra, we saw 350 to 400 in the center 6 inches, with 151 to the right and 26 par beyond that. This is fairly heavy directly under the light source, but it evens out nicely at 12 and 18 inches with 206, 142, and 67, and at a depth of 18 inches, 141, 112, and 91. The Hydra 26 HD is absolutely putting off intensity numbers which are appropriate for any type of tank. While the spread isn't all that wide at the top of the tank, it evens out nicely as you get deeper. The Z-Lite 6500 came in next and utilizes a unique design which has a large cluster of white LEDs in the center that provides that single source of light and then fills it in with a wider array of blue and violet chips, which I think is a really interesting approach to LED lighting, and I haven't seen this before. Theoretically, it's somewhat similar to a halide T5 install with the primary light source in the center and the supplemental lights on the sides. Par in the center at a depth of 6 inches was 365, 127, and 30 on the outside edge of the 30-inch cube. At 12 inches, we saw 212, 121, and 67, and at 18 inches, 144, 106, and 67. The performance is on par with other options in the market in this price range and size. However, I think the real value is with the larger size, which is a low-cost option for larger tanks and something I'd consider if I was going LED on a tight budget. It's also one of the few Apex-ready options. Next up are the 2 options from Kessel with the A360 and the A360N. The N is a bit more focused, but these are easily the widest spread of any of the lights we tested with the most even coverage. However, there's also significantly less par. At 6 inches, we saw 183, 106, and 39, which is the most even spread we've seen at this depth. At 12 inches, we see 104, 85, and 65, which is basically flat, even coverage over a huge area. And at 18 inches, we see 71, 68, and 69, which is only a difference of 3 par, and pretty amazing. Overall, this has the potential to be one of the best mixed reef lights out there when you consider the even spread and wide coverage, especially if you run multiple and there's some overlap, which increases the par. And with a spread this wide, there almost certainly will be. I think the tank in my office is a fairly good example of a typical mixed reef tank run on Kessels, and I've been really happy with them. If you're looking for something a bit more focused, they also produce the N version, which is a bit more narrow, and at 6 inches there's a par of 216, 103, and 10. At 12 inches, 126, 85, and 35, and at 18 inches, 84, 68, and 59. If I was looking for a bit more par and going to space them a bit closer, this would be a really good option. End of the day, the Radeon Pro is the king of par with between 484 and 375 in the center, but it also falls off fairly sharply after that with 88 and then just 15. At lower depths, it does even out significantly, and at 12 inches, we see 224, 131, and 33. At 18 inches, we see 151, 109, and 60 on the edge of the tank. Reefers who are looking for maximum par in the tank are going to find what they're looking for with the Radeon for sure. On top of that, some of the spread issues are easily solved by spacing the pucks a bit closer together and blending the spread to produce something pretty darn even. On that note, everything we tested here are single pucks, and all of them come in larger sizes with additional pucks, but the one thing that changes between all of them is the spacing of the pucks or light sources. The spacing differences will impact both intensity and coverage. The closer they are together, the higher the par output. The further apart they are, the more area of the tank they'll cover. If you want maximum par and even coverage, you'll probably have to get something with more pucks pretty close together and install them one every 12 or 18 inches. The Hydra 52 Radeon Radion XR30 and Max Spec position the additional light sources fairly close together, with a Zet light and the new Kessil AP700 position them further apart. The one nice thing about these pucks is you can position them any way you like. For instance, there are some savings to be had by buying a Hydra 52 rather than two 26s, or Radion XR30 versus two XR15s. However, if you buy the pucks individually, you do get the option of spacing them differently, as well as running them on separate programs or intensities for different areas of the tank. We also tested the XR30 Radion and the Kessil AP700 to give you an idea of the differences so you can decide on what's best for your tank. Just for visual reference, this is how the XR15 illuminates this rather large structure from a single point versus the XR30. You can see pretty easy that the XR30's dual pucks illuminates the structure much more evenly, so more pucks isn't just about more par, it's about more even coverage. The Radion XR30 is putting out 743 par in the center, 429, 6 inches to the right, and 77 at the edge of the tank. This is a seriously impressive amount of par. Most people will probably turn it down significantly, but it's nice to know it's there if you ever need it. The par is also much more even in the center 18 inches of the tank, with the puck spaced out like this. At 12 inches deep, 487, 304, and 162. At 18 inches deep, we saw 336, 263, and 182. It's easy to see how the two pucks blend together to create a much more even light source, and something you can expect to see on most of the light sources. Keep in mind, while the pucks in various models will often be between 6 and 10 inches apart, reefers often install the modules themselves 2 feet apart, so there'll be some significant variances. Spacing the modules evenly throughout the tank like the Max Spec Razer does is one way of producing a more even illumination. That said, I think the most interesting test of the day was the new AP700 from Kessil. This is how a single 360W illuminates the coral insert structure versus the dual point AP700. The AP700 does an awesome job of illuminating the entire structure. This is backed with the par readings we produced as well. At 6 inches deep, we saw 403 in the center, 344 6 inches to the right, and 239 at the edge of the tank. This is by far the most impressive illumination we saw in any of the tests. Almost all of the LED lights on the market produce pretty significant hot spots at this 6-inch depth. This is way more even than we could have ever guessed. At 12 inches, it was 255, 246, and 208. Again, unbelievably even. At 18 inches deep, 203, 215, and 201. Honestly, I think this represents a major advancement in LED technology for the aquarium and addresses one of the biggest issues with LED lights in the aquarium, which is hot spots and even intensity. The par range is also right in that sweet spot we talked about between 200 and 300 virtually everywhere in the tank. Looking at the chart, it also looks like the light will illuminate the tank far beyond the 30-inch dimensions of the tank we tested it on. Most of the lights we tested today were all about 8 inches over the surface of the water. If you raise this fixture up a bit, I can easily see how you could illuminate a 4-foot mixed tank with this fixture. And while it might be one of the more costly solutions, 2 AP700s on a 4 or 6-foot tank would be a pretty awesome solution on an SPS dominant tank. Selecting a light based on spectrum is a difficult thing, and all the manufacturers take a different approach. One is to provide the widest array of LEDs possible, maximize the spectrum possibilities, and then give you full control. At face value, I think this is probably pretty attractive to a lot of people because as consumers, we think we want more options with everything, and to advanced reefers who have developed their own theories on spectrum, want to test them and potentially have a tool to measure spectrum, that might be right. Another approach is to limit the options only to those that will work, which takes options away, but it's also a pretty responsible approach based on research rather than leaving you to your own devices and knowledge on spectrum, which 90% of reefers know very little about other than what's pleasing to the eye. It's hard to determine the manufacturers that are doing this in your best interest and those that are just trying to lower costs, but you can take a look at their approach and methodology. For instance, when I first met the Kessil team, they told me they developed their lights in a way that spectrum and intensity are totally independent of each other, meaning that no matter what setting you have it on, you'll have the right spectrum, and the only thing you need to consider is intensity. At the time, that kind of sounded a lot like marketing hype and almost impossible. However, at this point, I have to say, as I understand it better, I kind of buy into this logic. We took spectrographs of all 9 color settings on the AP700, and you'll see one thing here. The blue peaks basically stay the same with each setting. What's really happening is they're adding in additional spectrums with each color step up towards white. They're not removing important spectrums, just adding others. Their research has shown them that it's this precise mix of the bluer end of the spectrum, which is really important to corals. We all know that the green spectrum is not very useful other than for visual balancing. The red spectrum is mostly removed by the water in the ocean, and there have even been studies that show that the red spectrum can be more harmful than helpful at higher intensities. And behind the scenes, my discussions with many of the major players in the industry all seem to agree that it's this blue end that we really need to focus on. So the Kessel logic is basically provide the right spectrum where you can be successful for sure, and then allow you to add in other spectrums which may have some benefit but are primarily for visual appeal, and then remove the ability to create unhealthy spectrums with the 360 series, or in the case of the AP700, make them an option with the color wheel, but strongly advise that you use the Kessel logic color steps. So while some reefers might not like the lack of options, others will appreciate the options provided work. I guess the same could be said of the PAR, because Kessel's PAR output isn't trying to be the highest out there, it's trying to be in a range that you can maintain a successful reef tank. I will say this isn't limited to Kessel, and you can recreate that type of logic with the more flexible options like the Radion, and that's exactly what Josh did with his tank. You can see for dawn, daytime, and dusk, he has all the blue and violet channels maxed out. Only thing he does is add in some of the other colors to make the tank visually appealing at different points of the day. You can see he has the red, green, and white channels at 59%, but he also has the intensity at 40%, which means they're closer to about 24%. Overall, he's probably running his Radion at about a third of its maximum light output. We did produce a spectrograph of all the available lights turned on to 100%, and they're all somewhat different. Since they're all LEDs which are adjustable, this really shows the maximum potential, not what you'll actually be running, but there were a few notable differences between the bunch. Following the same order as a PAR test, this is a max spec Razer spectrum. The most notable aspect is how wide the blue spectrum is, and they use a special actinic LED. I will say that most people feel the Razer provides a color pop that's really unique to this light, and this is probably why. The Hydra has a peak at 460 and about 410, as well as a red spike, and a pretty wide spectrum overall. The Z light has a much narrower spectrum with a peak at about 450. Since the Kessel has a different type of interface, we took a measurement at the whitest setting, the highest PAR, and the bluest setting. You can see they put a pretty heavy emphasis on the 460 and 420 peaks, and they're the only light to have a significant peak in the UVA range, which is below 400 nanometers. You can also see the blue end largely stays the same at any setting. It's just the red, green, and yellow that are either added or removed at any setting. One thing I'd like to note is the focus on the 460 peak here that expands over close to the 500 nanometer range is really similar to what you see from the industry's most popular lighting options like the Blue Plus bulb from ATI. The Radion Pro has one of the wider blue spectrums as well as a sizable peak in the red spectrum with slightly different peak ranges than some of the other options on the market. Not surprisingly, the Kessel AP700 has a fairly similar result as the A360, including that unique spike of UVA. Other than spectrum and intensity, the last major way all these fixtures differ from each other is controllability. All of this will appeal to different people in different ways. The Max Spec Razer has 2 channels and a knob to change the white and blue spectrum independently, as well as set times. Far from the most advanced, but simplicity counts, and I personally really value the ability to make changes using manual controls on the fixture itself. The new AI Hydra HD is controllable via iOS, Apple, and Android devices, which is really pretty easy to set up and I think one of the better wireless implementations. The Z-Lite comes with its own infrared controller and it's Apex ready if you want to control it with your aquarium controller. The Kessel 360s have onboard intensity and spectrum knobs, and at first glance this doesn't seem as advanced as other options, but I have to say that most Kessel owners will probably tell you they don't miss the other options and appreciate how easy it is to adjust the light on the fly. They also have the Spectral Controller, which is one of the simplest ways to implement dusk to dawn effects out there. The 360s are also Apex ready or controllable via any controller that has a variable voltage port. The Radion has some onboard controls which allow you to change some of the settings, but not necessarily program the light. The Radion out of the box needs to be programmed on a computer, which means you need to bring the light to your PC or bring your laptop to the tank. However, with the optional Reef link, you can program it in your internet browser on most tablets or smartphones. The Kessel AP700 also has some onboard controls, but to program it you need to do that on your phone or tablet. Right now the only device you can program it with is an iPad, but an Android tablet is right around the corner, and in a couple months they'll have it for smartphones as well. Last thing we're going to do is cover how to tune the intensity spectrum and shimmer with your LED lighting. Concerning PAR or intensity, you really have 2 options, guess or measure. Most T5 and halide options are in known ranges and really don't require a par meter to be successful. However, with LEDs, they come in so many forms, wattages, spreads, and positioning both vertically and distance from each other plays such a huge role. It's super easy to nuke your corals, and I think guessing is just a huge mistake. It's my firm belief that this guessing on both par and spectrum is a reason why so many reefers have struggled with LEDs when others don't. No one wants to spend more money on a par meter, and I don't blame you, but most LED lights are not plug-and-play pieces of equipment, and they need to be tuned to your needs. If you're having the type of success you want, then just keep doing what you're doing. For those of you that are struggling, this is likely a big reason why. You can use a par meter to not only tune the intensity emitted by the light, but also adjust the height or position of the fixture or modules to get the correct spread and even lighting that you're looking for, or even lower intensity spots you might want. Fact is, the human eye is the worst measurement tool for par. Again, I'm personally looking for an even spread between 150 and 300 for most SPS tanks and 25 to 100 for most LPS tanks, but every coral is different, so pay attention to how they react. And for the last time of the day, I'm going to remind everyone that corals survive low light like 50 times longer than they'll survive light that's too intense, so start in the middle, not on the high end. Same thing with spectrum. While your eye might see color changes better than intensity changes, if you're just sliding the bar around hoping for the best, don't be surprised if you encounter challenges. Since spectrum is not something that's universally understood or agreed upon, and really accurate measurement tools are thousands of dollars, it's hard to give direct advice here, other than I try to emulate other reefers' successes and select options or settings that emulate popular T5 or halide bulb spectrums. For the most part, reefers are starting to all agree that blue LEDs are the primary concern, and the whites, greens, and reds are less impactful on coral health, and in some cases too much of spectrums like red can be negative. And I think programs like Josh's are pretty popular. There are a variety of par meters out there. We're using the LeCor, which is the most accurate, but you're going to spend thousands of dollars to get something this accurate. Most of the affordable options that are available underreport the blue spectrum a bit, but honestly the readings are generally within 10% of the LeCor, and in most cases absolutely usable to get you in the ballpark of what you're looking for. The apogee used to be one of the only good options, but in the last year or so we're seeing a wave of new par measurement tools coming out for computers and controllers like your Apex, as well as cool products like the Senai. It's not a coincidence that all of these new products are coming to market shortly after the new wave of popularity with LEDs. Reefers who are having issues are using tools like this and information to solve them. If I were in the market, I'd likely get one of two options. The Apogee is still my favorite because it's super easy to use, and some things are just better as standalone portable solutions. This is also something you can loan to a friend or a club can buy and loan out. The Apogee will underreport the blue spectrum a bit in most cases, but the 10% or so difference isn't going to drastically impact your success rates. 100 par or 110 isn't really a meaningful difference. Another really cool option is the Senai. The Senai monitor is half the price of the Apogee and has a unique feature of detecting the spectrums and adjusting the par accordingly, so it reports the blue spectrum more accurately. We gave it a quick test against the LeCor with both blue and white spectrums, and I have to say I was pretty impressed that the results were almost identical. We didn't test it on a whole array of environments, but I would absolutely trust it to get me close or better for my own use. In addition to that, the Senai also measures spectrum. Again, it isn't a $3,000 tool, but it is a tool you can use at home to give you a good idea where you're at and keep you away from big mistakes. And in relation to that, it also displays this information in the form of PER, which is a percentage of par that's photosynthetically active. To give you an idea of how this works, you can see the par here, the Kessel 360, and the PER level at its whitest setting. As I turn the spectrum bluer, you can see that in the spectrum chart with the black line, but as it gets bluer and bluer, the PER goes up. So while the par is going down, the percentage of light that the corals can actually use is going up. It's kind of neat to see the Kessel logic in action like this, and the Senai is really an excellent tool for measuring and tuning your LEDs for success. Tuning shimmer starts with selecting the right LED source. The more exposed individual LEDs you have, the more likely you're going to run into disco ball or flickering effects. So those LED options that spread the LEDs out over a large area have the potential to have a less appealing shimmer. Smaller pucks like the Radions and AI lights tend to do better in this regard because the LEDs are clustered closely together. However, the undisputed king of shimmer really is the Kessels because they have a single point of light they call a dense matrix array where all the LEDs are packed tightly together under the same lens. Pretty much everyone will tell you that this produces the best shimmer and basically eliminates color separation by blending all of the colors under the same lens. In relation to that, blue and white LEDs tend to produce a nice shimmer. However, some of the individual colored LEDs like red and green can sometimes produce an undesirable colored flickered shimmer when they're turned on max, so you might want to consider turning them down a bit so they blend together a bit better. If the shimmer's too fast or intense, try repositioning your power heads and return lines so there's less turbulence on the surface of the water. Height also plays a big impact. Lowering the light closer to the water with lights like the Kessel can reduce this shimmer impact, and with large arrays of LEDs, raising the fixture can often help a lot. If none of that meets your expectations, then your best bet is to add a diffused light source like T5, which will drastically reduce the impact of the shimmer and make it much more appealing to most people. That pretty much leads us into next week, where we're going to install the lighting solution for the BRS-160, which is absolutely going to be a hybrid solution of some type. Hopefully we shed some light on LEDs today and answered a lot of the questions some of you may have had. Next week is where everything is really going to start taking off for this tank, so hit that subscribe button. If you think these videos are valuable to the reefing community, let us know so we can keep producing them with a quick thumbs up or a comment down below. See you next week with week 22 of the BRS-160, our lighting solution install and hybrids.